Men in Black, are they real or just characters from a Will Smith movie? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV. And this week, my very special guest is UFO investigator Nick Redfern. He's got a new book about Men in Black and another one about the mysterious death of Marilyn Monroe, all right here on Guys TV. You can also catch me on Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and on KCAA Radio right here in Southern California every Wednesday evening. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, the interview portion of our show, and I've got one very special guest today. His name is Nick Redfern, and I want to tell you a little bit about him because he's a very interesting guy. He's a best-selling author, over 60 books, including Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, Roswell UFO Conspiracies, Men in Black, Women in Black, 360 Days, 5 Days of UFOs, The Black Diary, The Bigfoot Book, more and more books. He's a sought-out expert featured on many TV and radio shows, including Coast to Coast, Nat Geo's Paranormal, SyFy channels, Proof Positive, travel channels, In Search of Monsters. We're going to talk about a couple of his books today. One of them is called Men in Black, Personal Stories and Eerie Adventures. It's filled with the latest revelations on the sinister and deadly, and I say that with quotes around it, Men in Black, because it's not exactly what you might be thinking after watching the Will Smith movies. We're going to get some never before seen witness testimony combined with papers from top UFO figures, and it's all about UFO conspiracies, government agents, strange, bizarre monsters, the occult, demonology, psychic attack. Nick covers it all. He's done, again, over 60 books. And then we're going to also talk about his new book about Marilyn Monroe called Diary of Secrets, UFO Conspiracies and the Mysterious Death of Marilyn Monroe. And then we're going to touch on some other things too. So welcome to Guys Radio, Nick Redfern. Sorry for the long introduction.
Hey, Robert. How's it going?
It's going great. So as I mentioned, we've got a lot of ground to cover. So let's start right now. Today, we're going to focus on two of your books, Men in Black, Personal Stories of Eerie Adventures, and your latest, Diary of Secrets, UFO Conspiracies and the Death of Marilyn Monroe. So before we get into the two books, let's talk about you a little bit, Nick, because you're an interesting guy. You've done all of this research. You were a journalist. Tell us a little bit about what drew you into investigating UFOs, the paranormal, etc.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can probably tell that I've got an English accent. No surprise there. But, I grew up in the UK, and my father spent time in the British Royal Air Force, which is the equivalent of the US Air Force here. And he was a radar mechanic, and he was involved in the 1950s in 3 UFO events where the pilots were tracking these high-flying, fast-moving objects towards the English coastline. And nobody knew what these things were. They were performing all sorts of bizarre movements and speeds, and it became a definitive UFO. And not only that, there was a series of encounters over the course of 3 nights. On the second night, pilots were sent up, military pilots, and they were seeing the same thing that the radar guys were picking up from the ground. And everybody was told, you won't talk about this. This is a classified security issue. And my father did not say anything until I was about 11 or 12 years old. And when my dad told me the story, it really fascinated me, not just because of who he was as my father, but also because he was trained in the military. And it really fascinated me. And so when I was about 12, 13, started to read books on the subject. And when I finished school, got into journalism, magazines, newspapers, articles, a lot of music magazines, that kind of thing, which I still do quite a bit of now. And so that really got me involved in this whole situation from when I was just a kid. And I decided, well, if there's a mystery to be found, why not try and find it? So.
Fantastic. Well, you've done a lot of books on a lot of different topics, and a lot of them have been about Men in Black. So let's start there, because everybody, I think, the mass consumer and consciousness is aware of the term Men in Black. They've seen the Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones movies, and the dudes with the black suits and the black ties and the white shirts and the sunglasses. But it's a lot more than that. Where did this whole mystery begin, and what's it really all about? Because I was fascinated when I read your book, because it was nothing like what I was thinking going into it.
A lot of people say that. And the reason why they say that is because, the Men in Black movies, when they came out in the 1990s, most people, unless you were actually involved in the UFO subject, you wouldn't have heard of the MIB, back in that period, 1997, 1998. And in the movies, Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones, they're presented as sort of like secret agents of this secret agency. But if you go back and look at the long history, the real history of the genuine Men in Black, it's very much different to what we get to see in the movies. Now, Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones, the movies are good fun. The reality, though, is very, very different. And it all began in the early 1950s with a guy named Albert Bender. Albert Bender lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and he opened a UFO group called the International Flying Saucer Bureau. And it went on for a long time. He got a lot of enthusiasts that applied to his news work, and his letters were, he'd have letters coming to his house, all the time, hundreds and hundreds of letters from people, months and months. And he decided, well, I'm going to do more than just a newsletter. And he set up the IFSB, as I said, and he really had a following all around the world. And suddenly he decided to shut it down. And he said, I'm done, I'm not doing anything else. Now, at first, the thought was this was kind of, in a way, to try and find a way to boost, publicity. Kind of like, your favorite band says, we're going to retire, so you better all come and see us now. And then 5 years later, they come back again. Everybody's seen that kind of scenario. And that's what it was like. Or people thought that's what it was like with Bender, but it wasn't. He did walk away from the UFO subject. And at first, he wouldn't tell anybody, even his close friends, why he was done with it all. It turned out these three men dressed in black had knocked on his door one night and threatened him to leave the UFO subject alone or else. And Bender basically went along with the or else and walked away. Now, the important thing is that the MIB in the 1950s, when the whole thing kicked off, did not look like or act like government agents. They had sort of pale skin, gaunt, almost anorexic looking. And according to Bender, that they had these sort of shining, glowing eyes. And they looked sort of more, sort of demonic than extraterrestrial. And so that's how the whole thing began. Okay. But bit by bit over the time, it became a story of secret agents, but it actually didn't begin like that at all.
That's interesting. So do you think these MIBs, in your opinion, because you've done the most work exploring and investigating, are they interdimensional? Are they aliens? Are they working with the government, working with black ops, working with the military, secret space program, or are they working with off-planet forces that are looking into interests in this planet?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, because there are multiple different theories. And of course, well, we assume there can't be just, there can't be 5 or 6 different theories for what the Men in Black might be. Or maybe it's possible, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that the most popular theories are sort of extraterrestrials in disguise, which sounds really kind of crazy. But the fact is, people like Albert Bender, and Gray Barker, another early MIB investigator, they both saw the MIB, and they said it was almost as if whatever these entities, these creatures were, it was as if they were trying to camouflage their appearance, almost sort of putting these wraparound sunglasses to hide these huge bulging eyes they've got, and their skin looked kind of plastic. So a very strange situation. But the main theories are they're extraterrestrials. One of the interesting theories is that the men in black are time travelers, and they come back, they're sort of almost like scientists, you know, to come back and see what was going on in the 20th century. And maybe they didn't know much about the 20th century because they were so far ahead. And so perhaps they just decided to use the one costume that would work well, namely a black suit and a fedora hat, you know, for the 1950s. And then you've got some sort of more controversial theories like, you know, could they be demons, that kind of thing, or something with an occult aspect to it. So you've got a lot of different theories and angles. And of course, you know, you've got some people who think that, you know, there is a genuine sort of secret agent side. And I think there is something to that as well, because back in the 1950s, when people like the FBI and the CIA were very deeply investigating UFOs back then, you know, the clothing for the guys back then was suits and fedora hats. So I think some cases were genuine MIB cases, but others were just FBI guys with a suit and a hat.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've got a lot of times it seems like they show up if people have seen UFOs and they want to keep it quiet, and they kind of scare the people just by their appearance and their vibe. Yet if they were aliens, why would they be doing that? Or maybe there is a reason if they're aliens for doing that. But I guess my question is really, is there any documented evidence, either written or photos and videos, of these men in black in action? And for you, Nick, have you ever personally encountered one?
I haven't encountered one, but one of the weird aspects of ufology is when you start getting into investigating the MIB phenomenon, people start to get weird phone calls in the middle of the night and strange noises and electronic noises, things like that. And I've noticed that every time I've started to work on a new MIB book, which I've done 4 and 1 on the women in black, I've started to get that kind of situation. And I think one of the more intriguing theories is that they do that deliberately, kind of like an intimidation type of situation. But, you know, I'm not easily, you know, scared or worried or whatever. I just keep push on and going and going and going, you know. But that has happened to a lot of people. They've seen a UFO, and then somebody turns up on the front door and says, you know, I'm here to take a census paperwork. You know, we need to fill out this form for the government. And then they start asking all these weird questions, you know, that go far beyond the average census form. You know, they start asking questions like, have you had any strange dreams? And even the government doesn't answer that kind of question, you know. So, so things like that do happen. But yes, so many people who've had UFO encounters have had this sort of ominous knock on the front door, and you've got the pale guy standing there asking, you know, what did you see last night? That kind of thing.
Fantastic and phenomenal, and really it's interesting. Nick Redfern's my special guest on Guys Radio. We're talking about Men in Black. We're going to get to some other subjects, including the death of Marilyn Monroe and what was behind that. And also we're going to talk about some other kind of top of mind UFO oriented projects that are maybe going on out there. So Nick, is this MIB, is it a US phenomena? Does every major country either invest in these assets or have imported MIB episodes going on?
Actually, that's a good question, because, I mean, a lot of people assume, again, from the movies that it is just an American situation. Now, it did begin in the late 1940s, early 50s in the United States with Albert Bender in Connecticut. However, there was a large wave in the early 1950s in New Zealand and Australia. And interestingly enough, just like Bender, it happened when you had UFO enthusiasts in New Zealand and Australia looking for UFO data and investigations, and then they got the threats as well. In the UK, it largely began in the early 1960s. And since then, it sort of spread everywhere. You can find them just about all around the world. A lot of reports from Mexico and Canada. They had a wave in the 1970s. So you don't really know where they're going to come from and what they want, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, you're fantastic, Nick, doing all this work and putting yourself on the line there. I'm just asking you questions based on your opinion, so hopefully you understand this for the, for our listeners. So, in your opinion, along that line, is the government, our government, U.S., afraid of aliens, or is this whole MIB and the whole disclosure system, is it about controlling information and shaping public opinion about UFOs and aliens? I'll give you an example. I know there's some disclosure coming out now, and it sounds like it's been like watered down a little bit, like, well, there's some things we can't explain. And then last night, and I know how Hollywood always tips us off to things, and I watched this movie, The Tomorrow War, and it came straight out of an episode I saw on Gaia about the secret space program and these jackal-like creatures that would invade a planet, and then the whole planet would get together to fight off these creatures. And here it happened in this story, it happened on Earth, and then they had to use time travel to go into the future to win the war and get something that would kill them and come back and find out where they came from and then go underground and blow them up and that type of thing. But it part of that was in this Gaia episode was that the war was started purposely so that they would go to a planet to take it over, and they would launch this enemy against them, and then the people would fight them, and then these other people would come in to save them, to help them, and they would help them, and then they'd fight off these creatures, and then they would have their rights taken away. I know it's a big question, but what do you think of all of that and the fact that Hollywood seems to be maybe tipping us off to some of these things and helping shape the government's desire for how they want us to view the prospects of alien disclosure?
Well, that's a good point, because I mean, right now, we are in this sort of wave of UFO interest all around the world, and predominantly it's because of the revelations coming out of the US government and the military and the intelligence community. I think most people, whether they're interested in the UFO subject or not, they've seen these recent pieces of footage taken by pilots, and the pilots are like, wow, what's going on, And I think that really made a lot of people sit up who had no previous interest in the subject. And what's particularly intriguing, one theory, is the idea that the world of entertainment, movies, TV shows, the media, the press, may be sort of in cahoots with government agencies as a means to try and sort of climatize us to the idea that UFOs and aliens do exist. Because, I mean, although it all sounds very exciting, the fact is, if the UFO phenomenon is real, which I think it is, we don't really know what they are. We don't know what their agenda might be. So I think the government is taking things very carefully as a means to acclimatize us to the idea of getting used to the idea of seeing strange things in the sky. Now, there is a rumor which has been around for a long, long time that when back in 1951, one of the best UFO movies called The Day the Earth Stood Still, there were rumors at the time that the government had helped to fund the movie as a means to get people acclimatized to everything, like a kickstart. And that would not surprise me, you know.
That was the
Uh,
Keanu. That was the Keanu movie.
well, that was the remake,
Right. Okay.
yeah. But
Okay.
there was actually the original one in 1951. But you know, if the government actually doesn't know all the answers, which I don't think they do, you know, they may have a lot of data, a lot of photographs, footage, and who knows, they might even have dead alien bodies on ice, you know, 50 feet under Area 51 or something like that. Now, if the government, because we always think, people tend to think, you know, the government knows everything, they're clear on everything that's going on, but that may not be the case. Even the government might be significantly out of the loop in terms of having answers. And you know, and if the president has to stand up one day and say, well, yes, we know there are UFOs, but we don't know what they are, we don't know where they come from or what their agenda is, that kind of response from the president could actually frighten a lot of people because they're expecting, you know, a comfortable answer, and we may not have comfortable answers. You know, I mean, it could be something along the lines of ET, or it could be Independence Day. You know, they're either cuddly aliens or they're here to destroy us, possibly.
You know, that's a good point. And I think, you know, I understand if the government's I understand that the government is managing the information carefully as
Yeah.
they should. So this is not a slag against that effort. But you would think, on the other hand, that if aliens were here to destroy the Earth and they had technology that was far in advance than we have, and it seems like through those ships or whatever those objects are flying around, whether it be in the air or diving into the ocean, whatever, that they could probably have their way pretty easily. So it sounds like it's a little bit of crowd control going on, and we're going to get the drip, drip, drip for a while longer. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think if they did want to destroy us, they would have done it before we would have something like nuclear weapons, where at least we could fight back, you know. But and so because they didn't do that specifically, makes me think they're not on a road to destroy us. Um, Maybe they're scientists, maybe they're historians, maybe they're like us. You know, there's multiple different reasons why they might be here. Maybe it's the planet. I mean, if you think of like Mars, pretty much, you know, a dead world, Mercury, you know, it's like a huge stone. If you think about it, so far as we know, the Earth is almost unique in terms of, you know, the incredible diversity of life forms and things like that. Um, so maybe they're coming here to see the world. And of course, you know, we probably think, oh, they're coming to see us. You know, it's like that's our ego. Well, of course they're coming to see us. You know.
Because we're here. Do you think that aliens may have played around with human DNA way back from your investigations, way back in the beginning, and how the Earth and how human beings were formed, and all the different races and all the different types around the world, and the people with the kind of the elongated skulls, and a lot of weird stuff, and giant, you know, the you know, remnants of like giants that have lived here. What do you think that's all about?
Well, yeah, I mean, that sort of takes us back to sort of ancient astronaut phenomenon, you know, going back thousands and thousands of years ago, where, you know, you can find multiple ancient texts and manuscripts where people saw strange lights in the sky. And, you know, you have the giants coming down from the sky, you know, in these sort of shining machines. And, if you look at it from the one perspective, you could quite easily place this into sort of a UFO arena or UFO angle. Now, of course, this provokes a lot of controversy, particularly when you bring religion into the situation. I mean, some people have suggested, like the Star of Bethlehem, you know, could it have been a UFO? You know, this glaring bright light, you know, hovering over the skies. And again, also, you know, people talk about the giants in the Old Testament. Some researchers think they could be what today quite popular, the stories of the Anunnaki, this supposed ancient alien civilization that came to the Earth, possibly to use it as as a means for something to their ends, or possibly, or also at the same time, teaching us as well. So there's a
Okay.
lot of controversy that surrounds, the ancient side of all this.
Okay. We could go on, and it's fascinating. And we're just kind of throwing it out there because you're doing the investigations and the exploration. I'm just asking questions that people I've heard in conversation have asked. So we just want to get your opinion. We're not landing on anything specific here. So Men in Black, please stay away from my building.
Yeah. One of the things is, I'll tell you one little strange thing is that a lot of the men in black and the women in black, they won't come into the house unless you invite them in, which kind of ties in those old legends about vampires that they can't come across the threshold unless you let them in. So that's an interesting little angle too.
That's why somebody told me this. Somebody with a spiritual background said, I had a little sign outside my flat, and it said welcome, and they said, you got to take that down because you're inviting everything in. So I did, and I felt a real change in the energy over time. But let's move to your most current book, Nick. It's called Diary of Secrets, UFO Conspiracies and the Mysterious Death of Marilyn Monroe. As we all know, Marilyn Monroe died about 40, 50 years ago of apparent suicide. But there's been a lot of controversy about that. If she'd been drinking and she took a lot of sleeping pills, and she was dating the Kennedys apparently. And what's this book all about, Nick?
Well, this is probably one of the most controversial books that I've ever written. And the story itself, that Marilyn Monroe may have been murdered for what she knew about UFOs, there's sort of been like an undercurrent of this going back about 30 years. But most people in ufology have dismissed it, from the perspective, there's just no way that UFOs, the Kennedys, Marilyn Monroe, Roswell could all be interlinked somehow. But the more and more you look into it, you find, wow, there is more to this. And the reason why this began is that back in 1995, a claimed leaked CIA document was put into the hands of a UFO researcher way back then, as I said, 30 years ago. And the document, if you see it, it looks like the real deal. It looks like a genuine CIA document. It's got the headline, the font, and the typewriter is perfect for that era, early 1950s through early 1960s. And the story is that it was kind of like a situation, just sort of somebody in government, disgruntled, steals a document and hands it out to the media, that kind of thing. And that's basically what we know. And the document itself talks about how, because Marilyn was having affairs with the Kennedys, and the Kennedys supposedly, as a means to impress Marilyn, shared some of the highest classified data, such as, for example, this is back in the early 60s, plans to assassinate Fidel Castro, to invade Cuba, things like that. And one of them being that UFOs, or back then as they were known, flying saucers, really do exist. And supposedly President Kennedy had been taken to Area 51, which did exist back then, to show her the remains of the dead bodies of the aliens. But supposedly there were other people in the intelligence community who took the view that, well, this was just totally, that he should not have done this. And now, the story's coming out, and the theory or the story is that the fear was that Marilyn would not keep her mouth shut, and so somebody shut it for her.
Do you think, Nick, you think about the Kennedys, and they were in these very powerful positions. It's kind of a rookie mistake to be blabbing to the hot girlfriend about, government secrets. And, those two, the brothers, they were both assassinated. And then you had Marilyn with the overdose. It just seems like, Wow, you connect the dots and it makes sense. But then you also have, you wrote about Dorothy Kilgallen, who I remember was a
Mm.
very popular journalist, and she started doing interviews with people like Jack Ruby, and then she was found dead in a bed that
Mm.
wasn't her bed in her home, and a lot of question marks there. What do you how do you what is your take on this? You've done all the investigations. What do you think that uh, Marilyn Monroe committed suicide?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, what I would say is that what we know for sure is that Marilyn, she did have a deep interest in politics. She had this very much sort of ditzy blonde angle for the movies, but she actually was heavy into politics and world affairs, that kind of thing. That's actually why the FBI opened a file on her, which ran to hundreds of pages, and some of them have been released. Um, and what we find is that back then, at least, more and more people who looked into this, the Marilyn connection with government secrets, as you pointed out, more and more people, conveniently or inconveniently, died. Dorothy Kilgallen, both the Kennedy brothers, and so on and so on. And we also know that Marilyn did have what she called this diary of secrets, and she kept it, and every little snippet that the Kennedy brothers gave to her, she put it in her book, and nobody realized until it was near the end, and it was like, oh my God, she hasn't just been told these stories; she's actually been putting in all this thick diary, about 2 inches thick. It was like the U.S. government secrets. Now, you put all that together, it's actually quite feasible, really, given the fact that we know, if you look at the FBI's files, which you can get off the FBI's website, the Vault, they talk about Robert Kennedy, particularly having an affair with Marilyn, JFK to a lesser degree. But if you put that all together, it actually makes a great deal of sense, but also a tragic end as well.
You know, you think about this, and it makes you wonder with the UFOs and the Area 51. Let me just turn there because you mentioned the President Kennedy possibly going to Area 51. From what I've read that there's been some discussion that there may be security clearances higher up than the president. What's your learning on that from your
Yeah.
investigations?
Well, when they talk about higher levels, what there actually is, the secret classified top secret. And when people say sort of above top secret, there actually isn't an above top secret. But what they have is the concept of need to know. So in other words, let's say both you and me are working on one program and you're working on another one and you're not allowed to talk to me about it. Basically, you would know about Project A, I might know about Project B, and the guy next door knows about Project C, and so on. But they don't share the data with everybody else. So that's what you have. The guy next to you literally does not know what you're working on. And that's how secrets are held and kept as well. So, and that's the easiest way to hide a secret, is to keep it, to the smallest number of people as possible, really.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. And a lot of the stuff we're talking about in terms of the government behavior, you can understand what the thinking is, and does it come across the right way all the time? Well, maybe not, but you got to understand that they don't want mass chaos on the planet and in the country, so they're going to try to manage the information carefully. If it's okay, Nick, we've got a couple minutes left. Can I just throw some rapid fire topics at you, and we'll just riff on those a little bit? Okay.
I've had more of that.
All right. I remember what's going on, and let me preface it. I read a lot about Antarctica and Admiral Byrd going down there and with an armada, and then he being sent back north. And there's been a lot of talk about a lot of politicians heading down to Antarctica, and now you have things happening where some of the ice is melting there, and they're finding things, quote unquote things. What's happening based on your investigations in Antarctica?
Well, I mean, when you're dealing with a subject like this, UFOs, Marilyn Monroe, and aliens, that kind of thing, you put it all together. You have to be very careful, how you work. And I'm always go out there to, to get data, to make sure that you've got multiple sources for a story, just like a regular journalist would do on your local newspaper. And that's, I try not to sort of run around like a headless chicken, because another new exciting story has come out. And I've heard a lot of these stories coming out of Antarctica. And I'm not saying, I'm against it, but I'm like, if it's controversial and it's even more controversial, well, show me what you've got beyond just your next door's neighbor happened to hear it on the internet and shared it with your Uncle Jim kind of thing, where it becomes like Chinese whispers. I've heard all these stories about Antarctica, but I want to see the evidence.
Okay, I love the way you handle things because Nick does the investigation. He's not saying he's the authority on all of this stuff, and we need to respect Nick that way. So thank you for allowing me to throw some of these topics at you. I always think about the moon. Like we went up to the moon in 1969, I believe, around there, and then we never went back. And I've read, and some people say, well, maybe we didn't go to the moon, or we were told when we went up there, this place isn't for you, head back. And then there's been other theories about, is the moon a natural object or not? It doesn't rotate the same way as you would like the Earth rotates, and it's orbited by gravitational pull, but it doesn't spin. And maybe there's stuff going on the other side or inside. And there's so many different theories that have been bandied about. From your investigations, what have you ferreted out about the moon?
Well, there actually is some genuine, real intrigue surrounding the moon. You're right. I mean, the first moon landing with people on board, July 1969, and we did just a few more flights, and they finished in 1972. Now, the plans initially, and you can see the plans now, were to put sort of permanent on the moon. It'd be kind of like a North Pole or a South Pole output, that kind of situation. And maybe there'd be 10 or 15 guys. And over time, they would add more and more to it. And eventually you'd have something, the size of a shopping mall. And they'd be doing experiments, things like this. But it didn't happen. It all came to a shuddering halt in 1972, which is when the last time we put a man on the moon. And so the big question is, why did they stop when, we were going full ahead? It doesn't really make much sense. All we've really done is sent unmanned probes and satellites, orbiting the planet itself. And so the reason for that, we don't know. But yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of these stories about some of the astronauts seeing UFOs on the surface of the moon as a means probably to say, hey, get the hell off, this is ours, that kind of thing. That wouldn't surprise me because, I mean, if aliens wanted to have sort of an outpost very clear to our world and keep watching it, be able to watch the Earth, what's the best thing to do? Well, create a base on the moon and you could just see everything we're doing. So I do sometimes wonder, if the moon could be an outpost for extraterrestrials. We went there almost like as a prestige thing to get there before the Russians. And when we got there, it's like, oh my God, we thought we were just coming to see this dead moon. And, there's these craft on the edge of craters and things like this, intimidating NASA. And okay, we got to retreat. We got to go back until, things improve and we can figure out what's going on.
Fascinating. Let's move to Mars, which for, I don't know, my whole lifetime has been like, oh, it's a dead planet. There's nothing there. There's no life. And then all of a sudden they're finding little trickles of water or life on Mars, and it's become more talked about. What from your investigations, Nick, have you learned about Mars?
Well, actually, I've done a lot. Last year, I had a book come out called The Martians, which is, as you can probably guess, about the Martians. um, the publishers, I think, wanted the title kind of defined, you know. But yeah, I mean, although, you know, we're told Mars is a dead world, I don't think it is. There's a lot of really weird anomalies on the surface of Mars. For example, you know, I mean, a lot of people have heard of the so-called face on Mars, which looks like this gigantic sculpted head on the surface of Mars in an area called Cydonia. However, if you Google NASA plus crowned face, you'll see an even better carved head. And now NASA say, well, yeah, looking at that, it's just like looking at clouds and seeing next door's dogs, that kind of thing. You know, we've all done that. You looked at a cloud and think, hey, look at that. You know, it looks like whatever. But for me, you know, the crown face, the face on Mars, and there's also a really weird one. If you Google, excuse me, if you Google face hugger, like the face hugger on the Aliens movies, you'll see this weird, like a large spidery creature moving across the landscape. And again, NASA says it's just rocks in various places, making it look like a large spider. But it really does look like a huge spidery thing. You know, if it looks like a spider, if it's scuttling like a spider, it's something that looks like a Martian spider. And one of the important things about Mars is that it has a massive amount of water in the form of water, of ice, and of vapor. And of course, on Earth, you know, everything on the planet needs water to live. Doesn't matter if you're a human, an ant, a dog, we all need water. And so where there's war, there's a potential, excuse me, where there's water, there's potential for survival. And I personally do believe that Mars at one point was a thriving world. And you've got these various theories that maybe, you know, the Martians could have destroyed themselves in a way that, God forbid, we could do. I mean, we could do it now. We could totally, in sort of 30 minutes, totally destroy civilization on the Earth. There would be just a few 5-10 million left out of 10 billion or whatever. And, you know, there'd be nothing left. And I sometimes think that maybe something like that happened. If you look not far from just outward from from Mars, you've got the asteroid belt. One of the theories is that when the asteroid belt possibly shattered, that, you know, you had hundreds and hundreds of gigantic meteorites, asteroids slamming into Mars, you know, kind of like a Hollywood movie. And something, you know, you've got a situation of total destruction. So for me, Mars maybe, you know, still has life on Earth. I think it does. We're not seeing giant cities and things like that, but we've got anomalies on the surface. And I think one day we will find something. Even if we found something the size of a beetle, that would, if you think about it, it might sound strange, but that would be a case of finding a Martian. You know, it's not going to be a little green man or a giant reptilian alien, but you find something and you find life on Mars. We've got, you know, evidence then that there is life beyond our planet.
Fantastic. Well, Nick Redfern, you're doing great work. You've got over 60 books. The latest is Diary of Secrets, UFO Conspiracies, and the Mysterious Death of Marilyn Monroe. Nick, where can people find out more about you, and what's your next project going to be?
Well, I've got a book coming out actually in just a few months away, and it's sort of an A to Z book on everything to do with time travel. So you want to know about time travel? That'll be in there. And that'll be called the Time Travel Book. So it's an easy title. And people want to reach me. I've got a blog called World of Whatever. So just Google Nick Redfern, World of Whatever. Twitter, Nick Redfern UFO, and all my books are available on Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, you did a great job, great work, and you're gutsy putting yourself out there. And thank you for sharing everything that you're investigating, Nick. Thanks for being on Guys Radio. All right.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Thanks.
Come back when you have the time travel book. I'd love to talk about it with you.
All right. Great. Thanks.
All right. Cheers. If you enjoyed the interview and want to support all the helpful content we bring you each week here on Guys TV, then please subscribe now and also on my podcast, Guys Radio. Thanks for your support.